I'm going to ask you a couple questions, and I'm going to pause after each question to give you some time to think quietly to yourself about your answers. Okay? So the first question is, how is your personal ideas and image of God or spirit or higher self, higher power, whatever you call that universal source for you, how has your personal ideas and image over the course of your lifetime changed? From the time that you were a child to adolescence to your adulthood. How has that changed over time? Were there key events that caused your ideas or images to cause that change? And maybe the hook to the questions are, do your ideas and image of your God, spirit, higher self continue to change, or are they fixed? So this month's theme is inspiration through spirituality. And I am going to share a little bit of my history, just because it's the only story I can tell, about how spirituality has changed through my lifetime and continues to change today. So for many of us, when we grew up, we might have thought about a personalized God that had human characteristics. We thought of an anthropomorphic being. And yet, we may have thought of God as a principle, working through the laws of life or laws of the universe, which might have been more of a non-judgmental view, but maybe more mechanistic and not so personal. So where are your ideas now regarding the personalness of your connection with your higher power versus the understanding about how that higher power works in, through, and as you? So let's talk a little bit about, as a personalized entity, the thoughts and the discussions of years gone by are, so is God male or female? And when we think about God as an anthropomorphic being, we begin attributing to God more characteristics such as judgment, punishment, maybe not being worthy, or trying to negotiate when you're in trouble. So we tend to maybe start using a language to connect to that personalized aspect of spirit. And we may think of that spirit outside of ourselves, thinking that the power is out there. In other words, I am thinking about, and I am looking for support and connection, and we may think of it outside of ourselves. And then we may relate God to what we've experienced about love in our life, which means love with other humans, which, depending on your parents and family, may have been a good role model or may have not. Has anybody yet seen the movie The Shack? Yeah. Okay, not a whole lot of people, maybe 10. So the main character as a child was beaten by his father, speaking of the catalyst, and his mom was also beaten by the husband. And so God as a father was problematic for him as far as really understanding unconditional love and being able to trust a fatherly figure. He certainly didn't feel worthy, and he learned to judge others harshly, including himself, based on that experience. So we understand then that in that movie there's a lot of great messages, although if you had a traumatic childhood, you may not want to see that movie. On the other hand, the messages are wonderful because God does show up in his dreams as an anthropomorphic being, Olivia Spencer. For those of you who don't recognize that name, an African-American woman. So that was first a shock for him. And I loved part of the movie is when you do think of spirit as personal, she would constantly say as God, I am so fond of you. Beautiful, especially fond. So that personalness certainly feels good to us. It connects with our heart. But then there's also the side of God that we may think of as impersonal, so that more from maybe physical laws of the universe and scientific perspective. And what comes up in that way? Yes, there's this infinite intelligence. And we may feel like that's all head and not as much heart, again, into the thinking and the chatter in the mind. And you don't necessarily get a lot of warmth, perhaps, out of thinking about principle, God as principle or God as law. And yet, perhaps you may think about gravity. In other words, if a 3-year-old bounces a basketball and I bounce a basketball, yeah, I played basketball. Or you think about today's NBA players and bouncing the basketball, we're all using the same law of gravity. Does it look the same? No. And the nice thing about that is then it's easy to understand the impartiality. That then there is no judgment, there's just this law, and the way that you use the law in your life shows up and demonstrates what's going on in your life. So same law, different use of the law, demonstrates different results for everybody, but again, that may start to feel more mechanical, robotic, and what happened to the essence and the consciousness of that impersonal aspect? The relationship may feel a little flat when you think about it as, again, principle or law. Okay, so my story about God evolving. Does God evolve? That's the first question. Really, everything is always changing, everything is always expanding, but it's really how my story of the evolution of my understanding of God or spirit. Again, substitute whatever best works for you. So, I was born and raised in a Catholic family. My dad's side of the family is very large. And I went to Catholic school first through 8th grade. And which meant God was discussed, but Jesus was the primary focus. How could it not be as you arrive in church? Many times in the Catholic areas, you know, you see the crucifixion. And my understanding was that Jesus was the intermediary to God, and the priests were the intermediary to Jesus and God, meaning that I had to go to confession to be forgiven. In order to have communion, I had to go to confession. So there was this hierarchy. And of course, Jesus and God were male. And of course, there was dogma. Dogma, principles, understandings that you just didn't question. Or if you did question, the meanings were deep and you certainly didn't need to understand those. You just needed to follow the rituals. Follow the rules, and you get to heaven in your afterlife. Okay, this is not unfamiliar, and even though you may have not been raised Catholic, there may be a lot of Christianity perhaps that you were raised in that has some similar things. Now, there's nothing wrong about any of that. The key aspect of spirituality is how do you connect with your greater self, the spirit that is within you. Now, true confession, maybe going back to my Catholicism, I have to confess to you that as a kid I used to play that I was the priest leading the Mass. And I would find chalices, and I would, of course you memorize, you know, those things, and I may have not had it in order, but I was speaking those things. Was I intuitive? We're not having a Mass here, no confessions needed. Then I migrated into my teenage years, and I played guitar in a folk group with about 10 to 15 women. And we played and sang every Sunday at Mass in the evenings. And of course, many of the things that we played and sang were refrains. But there was also, of course, time for contemplation and special music. And it was really at that time that I became very deeply connected because of music, because of the vibration. Of course, holding a guitar, very much feel the vibration close to my body. And I felt very connected to spirit. It was a primary understanding in my life. I had renamed Jesus my special friend. And when as an athlete, I traveled a lot in buses because many of the places that we would go to compete was, 20 minutes to an hour away. And I actually was frequently called the team psychologist because a lot of people would come to me and I'd learn about their family's dysfunctions, and somehow through my connection of spirit, I was able to console people. Wow. Was I intuitive? So again, my spiritual connection was very deep, and I just followed the dogma and the rituals and the rules of my faith because I knew no different. This is what I was raised in. This is what my family knew. Next was college. Now, I was the first in my family to attend college. My grandfather on my dad's side was actually illiterate. He had been born in the United States, then he went to the Azores, then he came back to the United States, so he couldn't read, write, or do mathematics. And my parents graduated from high school, but I wanted to go on to college. Guess where I landed? Chico State. And during my college experience, away from my family, discovering more of who I truly was, not what was built as a foundation for me. And I like to think of it as a brick wall, not from a sense of a cold essence, but a brick wall in the sense of there are many beliefs. And if I look at each brick being a belief, your life is built on a lot of those different bricks. And as I went to college, removing this brick and looking at it and say, does that really represent me, or is that just what I learned to believe? And then I found myself in one of the most deepest dilemmas in my young life, questioning my sexuality. And this was in the early 80s, so certainly not like it is today. And I struggled very deeply because authentically, I felt I was very deeply connected to spirit. But I was being told that who I loved, based on what society thought or what God found acceptable, was not acceptable. Now, in case you don't know this, I was glad to hear that teen suicides suicide amongst gay teens is actually down since the gay marriage laws. That says something, and I can't tell, yeah. I'm not sure I can express how deeply, I don't think I would have taken my own life, but how conflicted I felt expressing who I authentically was to those around me. Of course, you're guarded. You're trying to tell a story because this is who you are, but will people judge you? Will they, obviously a lot of things could happen that could affect being protected, being secure, feeling comfortable. And as divine spirit would have it, for my general education, I had the opportunity to take an Eastern religions class, where I learned about the broader context of how others in the world experienced spirituality. Now, of course, the class covered many different Eastern religions, some of them you haven't even heard of because there are many facets, China, Japan, etc. But of course, it also covered Buddhism and Hinduism, which exposed me to understandings that went beyond me and my family's understanding. Now, for those of you that have studied other religions, most of this is already known, but for those that haven't spent much time, when you consider that I was raised Catholic and I told you what that meant, Hinduism is not an organized religion, really has no single systematic approach to teaching its value system. There are no 10 commandments. And, you know, compared to Christianity, Christianity is pretty heady versus Hinduism, yoga, meditation, body-mind connection, being was the focus. Not an anthropomorphic being, but Brahman, a supreme being who is formless, limitless, all-inclusive, and eternal. In other words, less judgmental. Of course, Hindus pursue knowledge and understanding of truth, but they understand that there is one truth, but as they say, the wise express it in a variety of ways. Hindus follow Dharma, and Dharma can be described as right conduct, righteousness, moral law, and duty. And of course, Hindus believe that anyone who makes Dharma central to one's life, meaning following right conduct, according to that duty, will have good karma. And of course, also, I learned about Buddhism, and doing a shortcut there, discovering that Buddha, while I had heard of him, didn't know much about him, he was disturbed deeply by human suffering. Was that what I was experiencing? And he quietly sat under a tree and became enlightened. Did he find the answers outside of himself? By following the rules of a society or religion? Or did he find the answers inside himself? And did he even need words to create a bunch of mental structures and rules for people to follow? So, needless to say, education for me was very liberating and came at a perfect time. When I felt that Christianity had left me with a choice to either abandon myself in order to be accepted by family, society, God, or to abandon my religion and stick with my authentic self. It was not easy. It was a difficult dichotomy to understand how loving someone, but God saying, no, you can't love them. But I thought God was all about love. And how am I hurting anybody else by expressing the love that I feel? And it was a serious risk for me to come out of the closet because my family is Catholic. Would they stick with their religion? Or frankly, would my mom stick with her daughter, with me? So it was a struggle to understand how a religious structure and society could judge me, especially when I was sure the relationship I had. And thankfully, my dad said, well, there's always been gay people, and there always will be. And my mom, of course, expressed nothing but love, and I think she was still trying to understand what this meant. But today, my family loves me as I am, thank God. Not all people who expressed their authentic self have been accepted by their families, and why I feel it's important to support, for instance, Stonewall Alliance here in Chico, because I understand the struggle. And it's difficult if you've been raised one way to actually change all those beliefs in a period of time and be able to articulate that in order to come back to your authentic self and allow yourself to express who you truly are. Now, this struggle, you know, is not a new struggle. I've read this book a while back, but now I'm reading it with a book club I'm in, The Gnostic Gospels. Has anybody heard of the Gnostic Gospels? Okay, quite a few of you. And for those of you who haven't heard much about it, so in 1945, in Egypt, they found some ancient writings, but those did not surface until the 1970s, because when people found them, they knew based on how old they were that they were going to be valuable and worth some money. And so it took a while for those to actually reach the scholars and to actually be translated in the late 1970s. Now, the Gnostic Gospels describe the book describes much of the disagreement about how to carry forth the message of Jesus after he died. The more orthodox method were that there were specific people that were chosen to carry the message of Jesus, to decide what dogma and rituals and rules were for the common folk to follow. Remember, public education wasn't readily available to everybody, and so the information and the knowledge was with, quote unquote, the church. And they decided what the rules were and how you were to live and profess your faith. Now, if you've ever played the telephone game as a kid, what happens when you're in a circle and you whisper something in one person's ear and it goes around the circle? It never comes back the same, right? It's always a fun game to play. And really, the Orthodox folks knew that. And hence, what they wanted to do was establish structure and to make sure that what the message was going to continue to be not the telephone game. And so, obviously, in many ways, we're able to carry forth the understanding of many aspects of Jesus based on the Orthodox setting up the structure. But there were the Gnostics. And the Gnostics exposed, who lived at the same time as the Orthodox as they tried to establish how they were going to carry Jesus' message forward. The Gnostics believed that the spiritual truth lied within through inner experience with the divine. Does that sound more like Buddhism? It might, if you want to label structures. Gnosis refers to knowledge based on personal experience or perception. So in a religious context, gnosis is mystical or esoteric knowledge based on direct participation with the divine. In most Gnostic systems, the sufficient cause of salvation is the knowledge of the divine. It is an inward knowing. So what do you think science of mind is? Gnostic. And of course, I realized that while Jesus was trying to point the way by being an example, some people stopped at the sign. So, back to my story. Education freed me from the framework that I felt bound by. And I felt that for me, again, internal, that I had outgrown the current faith that I was raised in. And that allowed me to have spirituality, but not per se religion. So I gave up on religion for a while, and I told myself I'd never go back to church. That's why we changed our name to Center for Spiritual Living. Just kidding. Most of you know that's not true. In leaving the religion, I lost my community. I lost the ability to connect to different spiritual practices, to evolve my education and my personal experience with the divine. Until, of course, I came to this very building. And Reverend Dr. Carolyn McEwen was here speaking about, yes, we are divine. And I automatically, just based on listening and looking at the materials and the activities, which you notice we have lots of activities going on, exposure to those different activities gave me an understanding that, yes, I am divine, I am worthy, I can be my authentic self, and I will be accepted. That was an amazing experience for me, and why I am still here with the Science of Mind. Now, the Science of Mind textbook has a whole lot to say about personalizing God or not. Meaning, there's a whole class that could be developed out of the Science of Mind textbook and the different aspects of understanding, yes, the personalness and the impersonalness of God, or whatever, again, you want to call God. Either way, understanding the science of mind can be liberating, even if you've been in science of mind for many years. So I'm going to use one of the more powerful quotes out of our Science of Mind textbook. God or spirit is supreme, infinite, and limitless personality. I like that. Limitless personality. And we should think of the divine being as such, as completely responsive to everything we do. As in, I'm especially fond of you. There should come to us a sense of communion and a spontaneous sense of an irresistible union. If we had this, we would demonstrate in our lives instantaneously. So I've been contemplating that a little more lately. As many of you know, I did a lesson a few months ago on Einstein's mathematical formula and how that's a mystical formula. E equals mc squared. Energy equals mass times the speed of light. And as I've been contemplating that more and more over time, I've been using that as a better understanding of my communion with the divine spirit. Based on today's science, it's easy for us to understand that right now we live in a sea of energy. In this very room, there are atoms, neutrons, electrons bouncing around in and out of our bodies, through our skin, through the air that we breathe. It is all energy. It's all God. And yet I can personalize that energy based on how my mind interacts with that energy and where I place my intentions and attention. So if you missed Connie's contemplation this morning, so divinely lined up, we planned that, right? That's right. She talked about how the rishis had developed, it's not so much about the words when you use a mantra, it's about the frequency of those words that are vibrating. And that if you walk over with a trumpet or a horn and you open up the piano box and you play a B flat, all the B flats on the piano play because they are in alignment and they vibrate together. That understanding is true of us regarding the energy in this room. It's opening our mind and understanding how can we align ourselves, and then even then, as the music plays, being attentive to the vibration that even when the music stopped, you could still feel a buzz in your body. Because we are 80% water, the vibration carries on. So I can feel the love in this room. And Kathleen, I loved when you said that spontaneously. Can you feel the love in this room? Can you? It depends on what you're paying attention to. We have many, many, many senses. Yes, we talk about the 5 senses. Everybody knows that. But we have a sense of where the end of our nose is. We have a sense of where we are in space. We have lots and lots of senses that are coming in and through us. But we're not usually paying attention to all of those, even though it's coming in. And so I've been using the understanding of energy that yes, it's personal by the way I make it personal, and yet it's impersonal as in it's a sea of energy, and energy follows certain principles and certain laws of physics. And I can meditate to allow myself to be in the union of that sea of energy, that I am certain the infinite love and intelligence is the base of all of that. It allows me to have my being in the divine, in, as, and through the divine expression. So my hope for you is that you continue to evolve your thoughts about God, Spirit, whatever you call that connection. I hope that you will continue to explore and discover new ways of identifying both the personal and the impersonal God in your life, because it can liberate you. Namaste.